2024 for Death Battle is now wrapping up with Among Us versus Fall Guys. And although this matchup is definitely my least favorite matchup for the episodes we got this year, I was actually really excited for it. I believe in Death Battle's quality, and I know that they can turn an otherwise boring idea into something really entertaining. And I'm glad to say that's exactly what we got here. The episode starts off with an actual lead up into saying the characters' names, and I've missed this so much. Saying the characters' names before any other words felt really awkward to me, and I always loved hearing about their connections before any other words were spoken. It gives the more casual viewers a quick reason why the episode was wanted in the first place, which I feel can help the general audience understand the appeal in more quirky episodes. Although with this episode, it's still really easy to understand the appeal. The added bit about 2020 was a nice touch and definitely added some personality to this episode. It was a dark time for us all, but at least we still had Death Battle to get through it. The Among Us analysis is actually pretty fun. For a series with absolutely no story, this analysis is fantastic. It sets up the fight we're about to see so well, way better than most other episodes. For example, they have this cute little bit where all of the staff members of Death Battle are playing Among Us together. And they have this cute little bit where the Ringmaster is ejected, seeing as he was the imposter the whole time. But after Ringmaster is ejected, they directly state that there is normally 2 imposters. It's a little bit weird that Wiz forgot that point, even though he said that his job was to know everything about these creatures, but it's okay, it's not a big deal. They also state that Red is always the imposter, which is both something that was said a lot when the game first came out, but also bleeds into the fight by noticeably not having Red present on the Skeld. We know because of this analysis that the imposters can shapeshift, so it really brought up the question of who the real imposter is in this group, even though they spoiled both imposters pretty early on in the fight, but I'll get to that later. The most interesting bits in the analysis was how the Among Us crew has faster than light movement based on shooting the asteroids, as well as the brains and teamwork of the crewmates since they do need to work together to survive whatever's going on in the Among Us games, even if they aren't really combat based. They're smart and they work together well. I'm so glad they covered the physiology of the crewmates and how their bodies work. Death Battle will often do this, where they deep dive into questions that aren't exactly answered with concrete results, like how even though the Among Us technically only have one bone, their bodies must be made of muscle to continue all those movements. This whole muscle idea is honestly something I find so funny and leads to a cool moment in the fight animation. The crossover section was one I didn't exactly know how they would handle. I skipped most crossovers in my prediction, but I knew that there were so many more that were canon than what I discussed. They focus on Henry Stickmin since the crewmates can have all of the items left on the airship stage, which is a really good choice in my opinion. Henry Stickmin fans, they're hearing our pleas. And they talked about the laser feat from Vampire Survivor, which everyone knew would give the Among Us crew a huge advantage when it came to offense. I'm surprised they didn't bring up the more unique skills and equipment in Vampire Survivor that the crewmates could have used, but honestly it changes absolutely nothing in the debate, so I'm glad they skipped it. Throughout the analysis, you can see a bunch of names and references to the Death Battle crew, which is something I completely missed the first time I watched this. But it's so cute just to see them all have fun together. I really love the ending to this analysis. Well, everything after the price of that nugget, because what the fuck, that's crazy. But the idea that they need to work together or they will face certain doom is the prime difference they have with the Fall Guys, and something once again that we will see later in the fight. But I'll talk about that when I get to the fight. Also, the Boomstick joke where he thinks he's nailing the setup to the Among Us name drop makes me smile so much. I don't know why, that was the first joke they've made in a while that's actively been like, heh. Anyways, let's talk about the Fall Guys. The Fall Guys analysis I like a lot less. They do have a story unlike the Among Us crew, but it's not even really talked about outside of mentioning Digi, who is the character that created the tablets that the Fall Guys create obstacle courses with. There's an overarching plot revolving around this white Fall Guy named Silent, but I guess it just wasn't really deemed worth talking about in this analysis. Maybe it's because they wanted to stay consistent with the lack of story with the crewmates? I'm not sure. Pretty much the rest of the analysis is just talking about their anatomy and the world they come from, mentioning the fact that the Fall Guys game is technically a game show for them in their universe, where the only thing they crave is obtaining that crown more than anything. Some people discounted the feats for the Fall Guys because of the game show aspect, but like they're still performing these feats? When you watch Wipeout, these people are doing those tricks and you see them getting legitimately hurt, so it's the same concept. One thing notably missing is any sort of speed stat for the Fall Guys. They talked about how the Fall Guys can rip you in two and survive a big bang, but don't bring up the dodging light feat from one of the trailers. They say the Fall Guys have some sort of mental fortitude, but all they really show is them remembering an image in a memory game. Most of the feats that actually matter for this debate aren't really things the Fall Guys typically do, like the Twitter feats or the crossover feats. But I'm perfectly okay with this because these characters are so kooky that exploring every aspect of them makes for a way more fun discussion. Without Twitter, we wouldn't have gotten this picture of their anatomy, which is utterly terrifying. Why do these beans have such weird skeletons? The last thing I'll bring up is that they didn't bring up a way to kill the Fall Guys, really. And that's because you can't really kill them. When they die, they just appear on a podium and continue later. I'm curious how they would argue an Among Us crew win based on that aspect, because that was my biggest question going into this episode. Overall, I think the analysis was fun for what it talked about. Don't take my criticisms like I didn't like anything about it, I'm just pointing out the things I think are worth mentioning. These two series are unconventional, so I imagine it was hard to figure out what they should be focusing on. But I think they did a good job, even though I like the Among Us analysis way more. Let's talk about this surprising banger of a fight though. The fight starts on the Skeld, and immediately we can see details I really like. All the characters are brimming with personality. All the Fall Guys start freaking out since they most likely have no idea what's happening. And the yellow Fall Guy's hugging the blue crewmate out of fear. What a beautiful friendship. The white crewmate looks more annoyed than anything, and the purple crewmate pulls out his tablet. The biggest detail spoiling the imposter reveal is the light blue crewmate shushing the viewers. Probably a nod to the fact that the imposter knows this is a TV show. And the other imposter, being the purple Fall Guy, has to see all the other Fall Guys freak out to mimic their reactions. The brown crewmate gets to work to fix that reactor, but is killed by the light blue imposter. And Yellow just happens to stumble into the room right before the reactor melts down. Some part of me thinks that Yellow didn't know what was going on and just pulled the airlock, sucking everyone out while the reactor was melting down. So he's the real hero here, he saved everyone. But in any case, they are all ejected and start floating out into space. The yellow Fall Guy and dark blue crewmate are still being best friend goals. The other Fall Guys are just floating aimlessly, and the remaining crewmates are being dedicated crewmates, pondering what their next move is. And if it wasn't obvious enough, here we have the purple Fall Guy shushing the camera just like the light blue imposter. We then get the shot that I'm not really the biggest fan of. You can really tell that these are 2D images that weren't adapted to move with the camera. When they start moving, admittedly, everything starts looking better, but this one shot is so bad. Also, if you ever play Fall Guys, don't play like Orange here. You'll deserve to lose. We then get another few shots that I'm not a fan of, where it's just images of certain characters getting knocked out, starting with the green Fall Guy, and then the white crewmate who just gets ripped in two by a normal obstacle. I get that the crewmates are so much more fragile than the Fall Guys, but Jesus, I wasn't expecting that. Then we see the yellow Fall Guy get knocked out. Then the purple crewmate. No one gets knocked out in the memory game except for us after we watch the imposter twerk. Not even the other imposter approves here. I'm also so sure this memory game was so easy for the crewmate that was left. After watching all these people die in the obstacle course they definitely weren't suited for, I'm sure he was so happy that it was just a match this image game. We then see the final game in this set, where the crown is the prize. Orange gets knocked out by a ball, with dark blue dying soon after while completing a task on his tablet. And wait, what is that? Is that the distraction dance from Henry Stickmin? I truly am winning today. The light blue imposter then tries to stab the Fall Guy, but the Fall Guy has his mind set on the crown and turns into his ball form to pick up speed. The imposter misses his attack, gets hit into a wall, and dies as we see this neat little Danganronpa reference. I'm not going to spoil a game literally made about mystery, so just trust me when I say it's a really cute reference. Pink wins the crown in a close race, forcing the imposter to reveal himself. Anyone watching this with knowledge of the characters knew it was going to come down to the pink Fall Guy and the red imposter, so when we didn't see the red crewmate in the beginning, we knew what was going on. I do like how even though the representation isn't even, having 6 characters from Among Us and 4 from the Fall Guys, it's still even in terms of that there are 4 crewmates, 4 Fall Guys, and 2 imposters. Anyways, the imposter tries to stab the Fall Guy and it just doesn't work. He then has to check if his knife works and stabs himself. I really doubt the imposter is that stupid, but it's a really funny bit. The imposter then goes all in and pulls out a gun to try to kill Pink, but the imposter just gets fucked up by Pink's superior combat skills. Wait, no, that's not right. Oh, and hi Family Guy hurt pose. This leads into the climax of the fight where it just becomes amazing. The imposter pulls out a banana bomb from Henry Stickmin and blows up the podium, separating the crown from Pink. The Fall Guys are very fixated on this crown, so they aren't even really trying to fight. They only want the crown. The imposter uses his teleportation device to interrupt Pink reaching for the crown while they pass a podium with everyone who has been killed or eliminated so far. 5 crewmate ghosts and 3 respawned Fall Guys. And they just enter back into the battle since all they want is that crown. 1 Fall Guy turns into Pac-Man. 1 crewmate uses a shield around the crown so a different Fall Guy can't grab it. The Pac-Man Fall Guy comes back and eats the ghost and presumably all the other ghosts of the other crewmates since we don't see them again. All 3 Fall Guys are incinerated with the imposter's gun from Vampire Survivor, which is technically against their own conclusion based on how they calc the strength of the gun compared to the durability of the Fall Guys. Stuff like this isn't too big of a problem for me, but I should note it since I do care about them presenting the fight in the same way they present their arguments. Anyways, Pink uses the TARDIS from Doctor Who to escape the blast, showing back up shortly after with He-Man's sword, even having the Fall Guy say, "I have the power" in his very cute voice. The imposter draws a sword, literally. And we sit here in awe at how the imposter can use all these items while Henry Stickmin couldn't without dying. They have a brief sword clash, which is cool, even though I don't think they're that good with swords. A jolt of electricity even goes through both of them as we see the insides of their skeletons, which might be my phone background for a while since it's so fucking silly. Before the crown just falls in front of Pink's eyes and he forgets all about the imposter and jumps for that crown. I'm just gonna note that in this whole space section I talked about, there are references everywhere to Galactus and Unicron in the Space Hawaii set, etc. Other people have covered all of these Easter eggs already, so you should just go look them up for yourself, honestly. I won't say it again here. Pink chases the crown while the imposter chases Pink, having this really fun scene where the imposter's arm turned really buff and he flings himself at Pink. This is why I'm glad they speculated on the anatomy of the crewmates, because it led to this stupid scene that you can tell they just had fun with. Pink gets caught up in the red imposter's tongue, as he sees the imposter's reflection in this crown, leading to Pink seeing his own victory stolen from him. I think it's funny that Pink still thinks that the imposter is after the crown, but I also find it really sad when you see all these images of the imposter having the only thing that Pink wants. And Pink is always crying close by. It's hard to explain if you don't really compete, but imagine you want something more than anything, and you can see that thing in your hands, practically in your grasp, but in the last minute it's taken before your very eyes. It can lead you to be a bit more aggressive at how you achieve that victory. Pink hardens his resolve, grabs the crown, and does something we apparently can't view on the internet. He then opens his eyes back at the podium with the imposter's remains all around him, as he looks disgusted with what he's done. In reality though, he was just looking for that crown. And then he dances as he celebrates his victory. Maybe I should do the same, since this is the first matchup I predicted correctly since I started these videos. Maybe I should dance. Nah, that was a great fight. It's so unconventional. I watched this with someone and they said it didn't feel like a death battle. And I think he's right, but I also think that's a good thing. It stands out, it's fun, and it's unique. I was pretty bummed out that this was the episode we're ending 2024 on, but honestly, I'm super glad we did. It had a slow start, but it only got better and better throughout the fight. Their conclusion is interesting, to say the least. But before we get into it, let's talk about a few scenes I'd add to this fight. After everyone gets ejected, it would have been so cool to see one of the Fall Guys pull out the tablet and start creating the courses they fight through throughout this episode. You can even have the imposter hack the tablet and start messing with the course. I think it would have been a great way to show how everyone went from the Skeld to the Fall Guys maps. Honestly, I think there should have been more ways for the crewmates to use their more unique abilities. Maybe have the engineer crawl through vents in the obstacle course to get the advantage. Or have the imposter turn invisible and knock someone out before reappearing. Don't get me wrong, I think they utilized a lot of the crewmates' abilities pretty creatively. I just think the abilities could be used to help the crewmates in the obstacle course more. I also think we really should have seen the blast ball. It's one of the earliest items in Fall Guys, and it could have led to a silly scene where everyone gets scattered around when the blast goes off. The fight was so fun and creative, so it's so hard to think of the things I would add here. I was really hoping for an El Chapulín Colorado reference, but I guess that series could just be too obscure to make it into this episode or just be noteworthy in general. But just know, I see you, my man. In any case, let's get to this conclusion. I really like this victory screen. It's such a small inclusion to the episode, and yes, the Fall Guys technically wouldn't be ghosts since they respawn, but it's so brimming with personality and charm. Just look at these two imposters back here. Red never bothered to get up, even as a ghost. What did Pink do to you, man? I really like the categories that Death Battle has been doing this season, but having a category called the Bizarre is a very interesting choice. Not bad, just interesting. The offense category is really obvious. Yes, the Fall Guys have created stars before, which we know from Bowser vs. Eggman would make them on star level. But the Vampire Survivor feat for the imposter is still way higher than that, so it makes sense. They could have at least listed the best strength feat for the Fall Guys instead of skipping over it though, just to make that gap in power fully known. Also again, they don't give the Fall Guys a speed feat, so bringing up the crewmates having light speed is strange because again, there's nothing to compare it to. The defense category has the same issue. We know the Fall Guys have the better durability feat because of the Big Bang, but nothing to compare it to on the other side. If you're going to say that a stat is better, you should do what you did with Omnidoc and clearly show the differences. They also go on to state that both sides have death negation, but like, that's not what's happening with the Among Us crew. They don't negate death, they just become ghosts. The Fall Guys negate death by respawning like nothing happened. I know what they mean though, it's just the wording I didn't like that much. The Bizarre category makes sense, but it's just way too short. The only thing they really go into is that the Fall Guys can stretch really quickly, which is a speed feat they could have used earlier. And that when the Fall Guys turn into Pac-Man, they can eat the crewmates when they're ghosts. Yes, the Fall Guys do have more bizarre equipment, but the section goes by so quickly that it almost feels pointless. Now I do agree though that the Fall Guys do win. But I think extending this conclusion even by a minute just to add more specifics would have made a big difference in my eyes. With everything as a whole though, this episode isn't bad in the slightest. I have my problems with the conclusion and to a lesser extent the Fall Guys analysis, but I really like the Among Us analysis and that fight. Although the fight starts slow, it makes sense with how many hand-drawn scenes they have. It ended up being something I really enjoyed. Plus, Jocelyn won that Among Us game that was referenced earlier in the crewmates analysis, so the episode ends on a high note too. With everything all together, I'd grade this episode a B. I think I like it a little more than Omnidoc, but a little less than Joker. Nothing comes close to Bowser vs. Eggman though. But let me know what you guys think. What was your favorite part of the episode? What was your favorite episode this year? I'd love to hear any and all thoughts. I'll be back next week with a video on my right and wrong predictions with every single death battle. Starting with Kratos vs. Asura, I'll include my right to wrong ratio at the end of every review I do. I'll see you guys then. Take care of yourselves.